The Great Council chambers of Nexus Prime had never seen such chaos. Ambassador Vex stood at the center of the circular room, her blue translucent skin flickering with panic. Around her, delegates from dozens of alien species shouted in their native languages. The universal translators struggled to keep up with the overlapping voices. "Order! Order!" Elder Noth's ancient voice boomed across the chamber. His 6 arms gestured for silence while his compound eyes surveyed the crowd. "Ambassador Vex has the floor." Vex took a shaking breath. Her people, the Altani, were known for their calm nature. But today, fear consumed her. "The Void Swarm has taken another system," she announced. "Kepler 442. All 7 billion inhabitants are gone." A shocked silence fell over the chamber. The Keth delegate Moore leaned forward on his mechanical legs. "Gone? You mean evacuated?" "No." Vex's voice cracked. "Consumed, converted. They are no longer themselves. They serve the swarm now." The holographic display at the chamber's center activated. It showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy's outer rim. Red zones marked the infected areas. In just 3 months, the red had spread across 12 star systems. "This cannot continue," rumbled Wex, the massive Valoran representative. His stone-like features hardened with determination. "Our fleets must strike back." "We tried," Vex replied. "The 4th Fleet engaged the swarm at Proxima Centauri. We lost 300 ships. The swarm lost nothing. They absorbed our fallen vessels and crew. They grow stronger with each victory." Ambassador Hex from the Rigel Collective stood up. Her insect-like form clicked nervously. "What about the bioweapons?" "The quantum disruptors." "Useless," Vex answered. "The swarm adapts faster than we can develop new weapons. They learn from every encounter. They take our knowledge and use it against us." Elder Noth's weathered face showed deep concern. In his 2,000 years of life, he had guided the Council through many crises. But this was different. "How long do we have?" "Our scientists estimate 6 months before they reach the inner systems," Vex said. "Maybe less if they continue to accelerate their expansion." The chamber erupted again. Panic spread like wildfire among the delegates. The Mintan ambassador fainted. The Borlan representative began praying in his musical language. "We must evacuate the outer colonies," suggested Kex from the Tau Ceti Union. "Save who we can." "And go where?" Vex demanded. "There is nowhere to run. The swarm will follow. They will consume everything." Moore's mechanical voice cut through the noise. "Perhaps negotiation is possible. We could offer them uninhabited systems in exchange for peace." Vex's eyes blazed with anger. "Negotiation? They do not communicate. They do not bargain. They only consume. I watched them take my homeworld. I saw my family converted into mindless drones. There is no reasoning with them." The argument continued for hours. Some demanded a final massive assault. Others proposed surrender. A few suggested fleeing to distant galaxies. But deep down everyone knew the truth. The Galactic Council was outmatched. As the debate raged, Elder Noth remained silent. His ancient mind worked through possibilities they had not discussed. Finally, he raised one of his arms. The chamber fell quiet. "There is one option we have not considered," he said slowly. "One that violates our most sacred principles." The delegates leaned forward. In the desperate silence, even the sound of breathing seemed loud. "The humans," Elder Noth continued, "the Deathworlders of Sol 3. A wave of gasps swept through the chamber. Some delegates recoiled in horror. Others whispered prayers. The mention of humanity sent chills through every species present. "Absolutely not," Wex declared. "We quarantined them for good reason. They are too dangerous." "Dangerous, yes," Elder Noth agreed. "But effective. Remember the Nexus War 3 centuries ago. A single human fleet ended a conflict that had raged for 50 years. By destroying everything," Moore protested. "They turned 3 systems into graveyards. The radiation is still there." "But they won," Elder Noth pointed out. "They always win." Vex felt a chill run through her body. She had studied human military history. Their wars were brutal beyond imagination. They fought with a savagery that horrified civilized species. That was why the Council had banished them to their home system after the last incident. "They might not even help us," Hex observed. "We exiled them, treated them like monsters." "They are monsters," Wex stated firmly. "That is precisely why we should not contact them." But Vex was thinking. Her people were dying. Every hour brought more reports of worlds going silent. The swarm was spreading faster than anyone had predicted. Soon they would reach the core worlds where trillions lived. What if we had no choice? She asked quietly. The chamber fell silent again. Elder Noth nodded slowly. The question we must ask ourselves is this: do we die with our principles intact, or do we live by abandoning them? Before anyone could answer, an aide rushed into the chamber. The young Rigel carried a datapad with trembling hands. Elder Noth, urgent news from the front lines. Noth accepted the pad and read quickly. His compound eyes widened. The Altair system has gone dark. All communication ceased 30 minutes ago. Vex felt her heart stop. Altair was her home system. Her cousin and her children lived there, or had lived there. That is 4 systems in 1 week. Elder Noth announced gravely. At this rate, we have weeks, not months. The chamber exploded into panic again. But Vex was no longer listening. She thought of her cousin's daughter, little Lux, who loved to draw pictures of the council fleet. The child believed the mighty ships would protect everyone. Now she was gone, converted into something horrible. Without asking permission, Vex activated her personal communicator. Her fingers moved quickly across the quantum interface. If the council would not act, she would. What are you doing? Elder Noth demanded. What should have been done days ago, Vex replied. She finished the message and transmitted it on emergency channels toward the Sol system. The message was simple but desperate. We need warriors. Our children are dying. Please help us. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Vex had just violated the most fundamental law of the Council. Contact with humanity was forbidden. You have doomed us all, Vex whispered. No, Vex replied, her voice steady for the first time that day. I have given us a chance. Deep in Earth's orbital defense grid, Admiral Kane sat in her command chair reviewing patrol reports. The 40-year-old woman bore scars from humanity's last major conflict. Her face was hard, shaped by years of impossible decisions. Lieutenant Rex rushed into the command center carrying a data tablet. Admiral, we are receiving an emergency transmission from the Galactic Council. Kane raised an eyebrow. The same council that banished us and declared our space off-limits? Yes, ma'am. The message is from an Altani ambassador. She is asking for military assistance. Kane read the message twice. Around her, the command staff waited in tense silence. Outside the windows, Earth's moon hung in space, dotted with military installations that had protected humanity for generations. Signal the fleet, Kane said finally. It is time to remind the galaxy why they feared us. Her aide hesitated. Ma'am, we are talking about breaking a 300-year quarantine. Kane stood up and walked to the viewing port. In the distance, she could see the massive shapes of humanity's war fleet. Ships designed for one purpose, to win at any cost. They asked for help, she said quietly. We do not do half measures. Earth's military command center buzzed with activity. Admiral Kane stood before a massive holographic display showing the galaxy's outer rim. Red zones marked void swarm territories growing larger each hour. Around her, the best military minds of humanity worked at lightning speed. General Torres, what is our current fleet status? Kane asked. The grizzled veteran looked up from his datapad. 47 capital ships ready for immediate deployment. 300 destroyers. 800 fighter craft. The Luna shipyards can have another 20 dreadnoughts ready in 72 hours. Make it happen, Kane ordered. Dr. Reeves, what do we know about this void swarm? The chief scientist activated her workstation. Images of grotesque bioships appeared on the screen. We have been monitoring Council communications for decades. The swarm appears to be a parasitic species that converts other life forms. They absorb knowledge and technology from their victims. Kane studied the images. The ships looked like massive insects crossed with machines. Organic armor plating covered technological systems. Weaknesses. Unknown, Dr. Reeves admitted. The Council's weapons have proven ineffective. But then again, the Council has never fought a real war. A grim smile crossed Kane's face. Humanity had fought real wars. They had fought each other for thousands of years before reaching the stars. They understood violence in ways that peaceful species could not. Imagine, sir, interrupted Lieutenant Rex. We are receiving another transmission from Nexus. Prime, the Council is requesting immediate assistance. Of course they are, General Torres muttered. 300 years of calling us monsters, and now they want our help. Kane read the message. The situation was worse than initial reports suggested. Entire systems were falling daily. The swarm was accelerating its expansion. How long to reach Nexus Prime at maximum burn? 6 days, replied Commander Walsh, the fleet's tactical officer. Too slow, Kane decided. We launch in 24 hours. The advance fleet leaves in 12. I want our fastest ships there immediately. The command staff exchanged worried glances. Moving a fleet that quickly meant sacrificing preparation time. But Kane had made her decision. When humanity went to war, they moved fast. 12 hours later, Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Retribution. Through the viewing ports, she watched as the advance fleet of Earth's most powerful warships prepared for jump. These were not the exploration vessels that other species built. These were instruments of destruction, designed by a species that understood war. All ships report ready, announced Captain Brooks from the navigation station. Jump coordinates locked. Take us to war, Kane ordered. Space twisted around the human fleet as they entered hyperspace. Behind them, Earth's orbital shipyards worked around the clock. The war machine that had been sleeping for centuries was awakening. 6 days later, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Nexus Prime. The massive space station that served as the Council's capital hung in space like a mechanical city. Its elegant curves and artistic design spoke of a civilization that had known peace for millennia. Sir, Council security is demanding we halt and identify ourselves, reported the communications officer. Kane activated the ship's external speakers. Her voice echoed across space with cold authority. This is Admiral Kane of the Terran Defense Force. We are responding to a request for military assistance. On Nexus Prime, panic spread through the docking bays. Security forces scrambled to respond to the arrival of humanity's warfleet. The sight of the massive black ship sent chills through Council personnel. These vessels looked nothing like their own graceful craft. They were designed for one purpose: to kill efficiently. Ambassador Vex waited in the primary docking bay as Admiral Kane's shuttle approached. The Altani diplomat had never seen a human in person. Stories described them as monsters, but Kane looked surprisingly ordinary as she stepped from her craft, until Vex saw her eyes. They were cold, calculating, and utterly without mercy. This was a being who had made impossible decisions and lived with the consequences. Scars covered the visible portions of her skin, telling stories of violence that peaceful species could not comprehend. Ambassador, Kane said with a slight nod, you requested warriors. Here we are. Vex struggled to find words. Up close, Kane seemed smaller than expected. But there was something terrifying about her calm confidence. Admiral, I must thank you for responding to our plea. Save your thanks, Kane replied. Show me the tactical situation. They moved to the station's command center, where Elder Noth waited with other council leaders. The ancient being studied Kane with his compound eyes. Admiral Kane, I remember your species from the Nexus War. You ended that conflict decisively. We ended it permanently, Kane corrected. There is a difference. Elder Noth nodded slowly. Indeed. We have prepared detailed briefings on the Void Swarm's capabilities and movements. For the next several hours, Kane and her staff reviewed Council intelligence. The situation was worse than anyone had imagined. The swarm was not just consuming species. It was learning from them. Each victory made them stronger and more sophisticated. Your fleets engaged them directly, Kane observed. Frontal assaults. Yes, replied Wex, the Valoran representative. Our ships are powerful. We believed superior numbers would prevail. Kane's expression did not change, but her staff exchanged knowing looks. The Council had fought like amateurs. They had used tactics appropriate for conflicts between civilized species, not for fighting a predator that grew stronger by consuming its enemies. We need to see the enemy for ourselves, Kane announced. Captain Brooks will lead a reconnaissance mission to the nearest infected system. That is extremely dangerous, warned Moore, the Keth delegate. Our last scouting mission did not return. Our ships are not your ships, Kane replied simply. Captain Brooks selected the fastest vessels in the fleet for the reconnaissance mission. These were not the massive dreadnoughts that terrified Council security. They were hunters, designed to strike fast and disappear. The crews were volunteers, but then again, all human military personnel were volunteers. Their species did not conscript soldiers. They did not need to. The human scouts reached the Kepler system 24 hours later. What they found exceeded their worst expectations. The once peaceful worlds had been transformed into nightmare landscapes. Biomechanical structures covered entire continents. Swarm ships moved in organized patterns, harvesting remaining resources. "Sir, we are detecting massive fleet movements," reported Lieutenant Pax from the sensor station. "The swarm is gathering for another expansion wave." Brooks studied the tactical display. Thousands of enemy vessels were massing near the system's edge. Their destination was obvious: the remaining Council territories. How long until they reach inhabited systems? At current speed, 72 hours, Pax calculated. Brooks activated the communications array. "Admiral Kane, we have a problem." Back on Nexus Prime, Kane received the report in the Council chambers. The gathered delegates listened in growing horror as Brooks described the enemy buildup. Elder Noth's ancient features showed despair. 72 hours, he whispered. "We cannot evacuate entire worlds in that time." Kane turned to address the Council. Her voice cut through their panic like a blade. "Evacuation is not an option." "We fight?" "Fight?" Vex asked incredulously. "Against those numbers? Our entire fleet could not stop them." "Your fleet fought to minimize casualties," Kane explained. "They tried to preserve infrastructure and civilian populations. We do not have such restrictions." Wex leaned forward. "What are you suggesting?" Kane activated the holographic display, showing the infected systems. "We propose strategic nuclear strikes on infected worlds to contain the spread, followed by systematic extermination of swarm hives." The chamber erupted in shocked protests. The idea of destroying entire worlds horrified the Council delegates. Such actions went against everything their civilization stood for. "You cannot be serious," Elder Noth said. "Those worlds have civilian populations." Kane's expression remained cold. "No, they do not. There are no civilians left on those worlds. Only food for the enemy." The brutal truth silenced the chamber. The Council had spent centuries believing that all conflicts could be resolved through negotiation and compromise. They had forgotten that some enemies could not be reasoned with. "Long-range sensors are detecting movement," announced an aide. "A massive swarm fleet is approaching Nexus Prime. Estimated arrival, 18 hours. Kane stood up. "Then we stop them here." "Admiral," Vex said desperately, "they outnumber us 1,000 to 1. Kane looked around the chamber at the terrified faces of beings who had lived their entire lives in peace. They could not understand what humanity was about to do. They could not comprehend the level of violence their species was capable of unleashing. "Numbers do not matter," Kane said quietly. "We are not here to win a battle. We are here to send a message." She turned and walked toward the exit. "Signal the fleet. All ships to battle stations." Behind her, the Council delegates sat in stunned silence. They had asked for help from monsters. Now they were about to discover what monsters could do when properly motivated. In the depths of space, the human warfleet began to move. These were not the elegant vessels of peaceful civilizations. They were the products of a species that had been forged in the crucible of endless war. Every system was designed for maximum lethality. Every weapon was built to destroy utterly. The Void Swarm was about to learn why the galaxy had feared humanity enough to lock them away for 3 centuries. They were about to discover what Deathworlders did when pushed to their limits. The Kepler Nebula stretched across space like a multicolored cloud of cosmic dust and dying stars. Within its swirling depths, 2 fleets prepared for battle. The Void Swarm's bioships moved in perfect formation, their organic hulls pulsing with alien life. Thousands of vessels, each one grown rather than built, waited in the nebula's heart. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching the tactical display. The human fleet numbered only 47 ships against the swarm's thousands. By any reasonable calculation, they should retreat. But humanity had never been reasonable when it came to warfare. "Commander Walsh, are your fighters ready?" Kane asked. The tactical officer nodded grimly. "All squadrons report ready for launch. Plasma torpedoes armed, fusion cannons charged." "Captain Brooks, what about our boarding parties?" Brooks checked his datapad. "Strike teams are equipped and standing by. If we can capture one of their command ships, we might learn their weaknesses." Kane studied the enemy formation. The swarm ships were unlike anything in Council databases. They appeared to be living creatures merged with advanced technology. Organic armor plating covered weapon systems that defied understanding. These were not machines. They were predators. "Sir, enemy fleet is beginning to move," reported Lieutenant Rex. "They are advancing in a spiral formation." Kane watched as the swarm vessels began their approach. Their movement was eerily coordinated like a school of fish or a flock of birds. No individual ship broke formation. They moved as a single organism. Interesting, Kane murmured. Commander Walsh, launch all fighters. Target their formation edges. Let us see how they respond to chaos. Human fighter craft screamed from their launch bays like angry hornets. These were not the sleek interceptors favored by Council forces. They were heavily armored assault craft designed to survive in the heart of battle. Each pilot had been trained from childhood to fight impossible odds. The fighters dove into the nebulous swirling dust clouds. Their sensors had difficulty penetrating the cosmic interference, but human pilots had learned to fight in conditions that would blind other species. They relied on instinct and experience. First contact in 30 seconds, announced Squadron Leader Jax over the communications array. Enemy ships are adapting their formation. Through the viewing port, Kane watched distant explosions light up the nebula. The first waves of fighters engaged swarm interceptors in brutal dogfights. Human vessels used hit-and-run tactics, striking fast and disappearing into the dust clouds. "Sir, something strange is happening," reported the sensor operator. "The enemy ships are sharing information instantaneously. When one learns our tactics, they all learn." Kane nodded. She had expected this. The swarm was a hive mind. Individual ships were merely extensions of a greater intelligence. But hive minds had weaknesses. They depended on communication. "Dr. Reeves, how is that quantum virus coming along?" Kane asked through the communication system. The scientist's voice crackled with static. "Still working on it, Admiral. But I need more data on their communication methods." "You'll have it," Kane promised. "Lieutenant Pax, prepare boarding shuttles. We need prisoners." The battle intensified as the main fleets closed distance. Swarm bioships opened fire with weapons that seemed to bend space itself. Energy beams twisted through dimensions, striking human vessels from impossible angles. But human ships had been designed by a species that expected their enemies to cheat. The Retribution's armor absorbed the first wave of attacks. Emergency lights flickered as the ship shook under the assault. But the massive dreadnought held together. Human military engineering had been perfected through centuries of warfare against their own kind. "Return fire," Kane ordered. "All weapons, maximum yield." The human fleet unleashed hell. Plasma cannons designed to crack planets fired at point-blank range. Nuclear torpedoes with yields measured in gigatons streaked through space. Gravitational weapon systems that could collapse stars focused their fury on the swarm formation. The lead swarm vessels simply absorbed the attacks. Their organic hulls regenerated damage faster than human weapons could inflict it. Worse, the bioships began adapting. Their armor grew thicker. Their weapons became more accurate. "Sir, our conventional weapons are ineffective," reported Commander Walsh. "They are learning too fast." Kane had expected this as well. Fighting the swarm with normal tactics would be like fighting cancer with bandages. Sometimes the cure had to be worse than the disease. "Launch the special weapons," Kane ordered quietly. Her bridge crew exchanged glances. They all knew what that meant. Humanity had developed weapons so terrible that they had never been used, even during their worst civil wars. Devices that violated the fundamental laws of physics. Technology that scared even its creators, "Ma'am, are you sure?" asked Captain Brooks. Once we use those, the galaxy will remember why they banished us," Kane finished. "But the alternative is extinction for everyone." The first special weapon launched was a reality bomb. It traveled slowly through space, looking like nothing more than a metallic sphere. When it reached the center of the swarm formation, it simply disappeared. For a moment, nothing happened. Then space itself began to unravel. A growing sphere of absolute nothingness expanded outward. Swarm ships touched by the effect simply ceased to exist. They did not explode or burn. They were retroactively deleted from reality. The weapon consumed matter, energy, and information without distinction. The swarm fleet recoiled like a living thing experiencing pain. For the first time, their perfect formation broke apart. Individual ships tried to flee the expanding zone of non-existence. "It's working," breathed Commander Walsh. "They're retreating." But Kane's expression remained grim. "No, they're regrouping, learning." The swarm fleet pulled back beyond the reality bomb's range. The weapon eventually burned itself out, leaving only empty space where thousands of enemy ships had been. But the remaining vessels began changing. Their hulls developed new armor plating. Their formations became more scattered. They adapted to reality deletion in minutes. observed Dr. Reeves over the communications array. That should be impossible. Nothing is impossible for a sufficiently advanced predator, Kane replied. Lieutenant Pack's launch boarding parties now. We need to understand how their hive mind works. Major Dixon led the boarding assault on the nearest swarm vessel. His team used personal teleportation devices to materialize inside the enemy ship. What they found defied description. The interior was not built. It had grown. Corridors pulsed like arteries. The walls were covered in a substance that seemed part metal, part flesh. Organic conduits carried both electricity and what appeared to be blood. "Sir, this is not a ship," reported Sergeant Vale over the radio. "It's a living creature." Dixon's team moved deeper into the vessel. They encountered no crew in the traditional sense. Instead, they found beings that had once been various galactic species, now converted into components of the ship's nervous system. Keth, Valoran, and Altani faces stared out from organic pods, their consciousness absorbed into the hive mind. "My God," whispered Private Dex. "They're still alive in there." Dixon studied the converted beings with professional detachment. Human soldiers had seen horrors that would drive other species insane. But this was different. This was personal. Keep moving. Find their control center. They discovered it deep in the ship's core. A massive brain-like structure pulsed with alien thoughts. Thousands of neural connections linked it to similar organs throughout the vessel. The hive mind's local node was right in front of them. "Dr. Reeves, we found it," Dixon reported. "Uploading scans now." But as his team worked to gather data, the ship began to change around them. The organic walls started closing in. The swarm had realized what the humans were doing. "Sir, we're trapped," reported Vale. "The corridors are sealing." Dixon made a decision that would have horrified any civilized species. He armed a quantum virus device Dr. Reeves had designed. The weapon would destroy the local hive node, but it would also kill his entire team. They were too deep in the ship to escape. "All teams fall back to minimum safe distance," Dixon ordered. "I'm going to manually deploy the virus." "Major, that's a suicide mission," protested Kane over the radio. "Yes, ma'am, it is," Dixon replied calmly. "But it's also the only way to disrupt their communication network." Kane closed her eyes. She had sent thousands of soldiers to their deaths over the years. Each one had been necessary. Each one had saved more lives than it cost. That did not make it easier. "Do it," she ordered. Dixon activated the quantum virus and placed it directly against the hive node. The device began to pulse with malevolent energy. Around him, the organic walls writhed in what might have been pain. "For humanity," Dixon said quietly, then triggered the device. The explosion was not visible from outside the ship, but the effect was immediate. The swarm vessel began to drift, its coordination gone. Similar effects spread through nearby ships as the virus propagated through their communication network. Across the battlefield, hundreds of swarm vessels suddenly lost synchronization. They collided with each other, fired on their own forces, and spun out of control. The perfect hive mind coordination that had made them invincible was failing. "It worked," announced Commander Walsh. "Their formation is collapsing." But Kane knew the victory was temporary. Already the swarm was adapting. Ships that had been affected by the virus were being isolated from the network. The hive mind was cutting away infected portions of itself like a body-fighting disease. Then something even worse happened. A new voice spoke directly into Kane's mind, bypassing all technology. It was ancient, intelligent, and utterly alien. When it spoke, reality itself seemed to shiver. "Your species intrigues us," the voice said. "We have consumed thousands of civilizations, but none have fought with such creative brutality. We will save you for last so you can watch everything burn." Kane felt ice in her veins. The local hive nodes were not the real enemy. They were just tools, somewhere in the depths of space. An intelligence that had devoured civilizations for millennia was studying humanity with the interest of a predator encountering new prey. "All ships prepare for full retreat," Kane ordered. "We need to regroup and—" The order was never finished. Space around the human fleet began to twist. The ancient intelligence was done playing. It was time to show these upstart Deathworlders what real power looked like. The final phase of the battle was about to begin, and humanity was no longer the apex predator. They had awakened something that made their worst nightmares look like children's stories. Admiral Kane stood in the Retribution's war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing the galaxy in crisis. Red zones now covered a third of known space. The Void Swarm had launched simultaneous attacks on dozens of worlds following their encounter in the Kepler Nebula. The ancient intelligence behind the hive mind was no longer hiding its true capabilities. Status report, Kane demanded. General Torres pulled up tactical data. Rigel Prime fell 6 hours ago. The Altair colonies are under assault. The swarm is hitting everything at once faster than our models predicted. They learned from our battle, Kane observed. They know we can disrupt their local networks, so they are striking before we can coordinate a defense. Dr. Reeves appeared on the communication screen from her laboratory on Luna Base. Admiral, I have disturbing news. The quantum virus we used only affected the surface level of their hive mind. The real intelligence, the ancient entity, was never at risk. Kane nodded grimly. She had suspected as much. The voice that had spoken in her mind during the battle carried the weight of eons. This was not some recently evolved predator species. This was something that had been hunting civilizations since before humans discovered fire. Colonel Hayes, what is the status of our special weapons program? Kane asked. The weapons specialist's scarred face showed concern. We have developed new systems, but Admiral, some of these devices, they violate fundamental laws of physics. Using them could have consequences we cannot predict. Show me, Kane ordered. Hayes activated a secure holographic display. Images of impossible weapons filled the air around them. Planet crackers that could shatter worlds. Black hole generators that weaponized gravity itself. Temporal bombs that could erase targets from history. These are not weapons, Hayes continued. They are instruments of cosmic destruction. Some of our own scientists refused to work on them. Kane studied each device. Humanity had always pushed the boundaries of what was possible. When faced with extinction, they pushed further. How many can we deploy? All of them, Hayes replied quietly. The question is whether we should. Before Kane could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Emergency lights bathed the war room in red. Lieutenant Rex's voice echoed over the communication system. Admiral, urgent message from the Galactic Council. Elder Noth is requesting immediate assistance. Kane activated the communications array. Elder Noth's image appeared, but the ancient being looked different. His compound eyes showed fear that Kane had never seen before. Behind him, the council chambers were in chaos. Admiral Kane, Noth said desperately. The swarm has taken the Vega system, but that is not the worst news. Some council members are attempting to negotiate with the entity behind the attacks. Kane's expression hardened. Negotiate? They believe they can offer the entity uninhabited systems in exchange for peace. They do not understand what we are truly facing. Kane had seen this before. When civilizations faced extinction, some always chose surrender over the unthinkable alternatives. Where are these negotiations taking place? A delegation led by Ambassador Quex has departed for the Tau Ceti system. They plan to meet with swarm representatives in 18 hours. Kane closed the connection and turned to her staff. The fools on the council did not understand. You could not negotiate with a cosmic predator. You could only kill it or be consumed by it. General Torres, how fast can we reach Tau Ceti? If we push the engines beyond safety limits, 14 hours. Do it, Kane ordered. Colonel Hayes, prep the temporal bombs. We are going to send a message that the entire galaxy will understand. But even as the human fleet raced toward Tau Ceti, Kane knew they were fighting a losing battle. The swarm was not just a military threat. It was a plague that infected the very concept of civilization. Every world it touched became a weapon against the remaining free systems. Captain Stone's voice came over the communications array from the outer systems. Admiral, I need authorization for extreme measures. The colonies we are defending cannot be saved conventionally. Kane reviewed Stone's situation on her tactical display. His forces were outnumbered 1,000 to 1. The only way to prevent the swarm from gaining more resources was to deny them those resources permanently. Authorization granted, Kane said quietly. Scorched Earth protocols are now in effect. Stone's acknowledgement was grim. Understood, Admiral. We will leave nothing for them to consume. What followed would haunt the galaxy for generations. Human forces began implementing tactics that horrified even their own allies. Entire star systems were rendered uninhabitable rather than allow the swarm to claim them. Planets were cracked open. Suns were destabilized. Life-bearing worlds became radioactive wastelands. Ambassador Vex watched in horror from Nexus Prime as reports flooded in. The humans were not just fighting the swarm. They were destroying everything in their path to prevent enemy expansion. They have gone too far, declared Wex, the Valoran representative. They are becoming worse than the enemy they claim to fight. But Elder Noth understood what Vex could not. They are saving us by damning themselves. Every world they destroy is one the Swarm cannot use against us. Meanwhile, Dr. Reeves made a discovery that changed everything. Deep in the Swarm's genetic memory banks recovered from captured bioships, she found impossible information. "Admiral," she reported urgently, "I have found something in the Swarm's biological data. Earth is not humanity's original homeworld." Kane felt the universe shift around her. "What are you saying?" "The genetic patterns are clear. Humans are descendants of another species that fought the Swarm millions of years ago. The isolation on Earth, the evolution that made you Deathworlders, it was not natural selection. It was preparation. The implications were staggering. Humanity had not become violent through random evolution. They had been engineered by a previous civilization specifically to fight cosmic threats like the Swarm. Every brutal instinct, every capacity for overwhelming violence had been carefully crafted over eons. "We are living weapons," Kane whispered. "Yes," Dr. Reeves confirmed. "And according to the genetic data, you are not the only ones. Other descendant species exist throughout the galaxy, hidden and waiting." Kane absorbed this information. Somewhere in the galaxy, other children of the ancient warrior race were stirring. The Swarm had not just awakened humanity. It had triggered a response that had been dormant for millions of years. But there was no time to process the revelation. The human fleet reached Tau Ceti to find the council delegation in the middle of negotiations with a Swarm representative. The enemy had sent a converted being, something that had once been a proud Keth scientist but was now a hollow shell filled with alien intelligence, Admiral. "Kane," the creature spoke with the scientist's voice but the ancient entity's words. "How pleasant to finally meet in person. Your species shows such promise." Kane stepped forward in the zero gravity of the meeting station. Around her, council delegates cowered in fear. They had thought they were negotiating with a reasonable enemy. Instead, they were face to face with cosmic horror. "I am not here to talk," Kane stated simply. "No," the creature agreed. "You are here to threaten us with your planet-killing weapons. We are aware of your capabilities. We find them amusing." Kane activated a small device on her wrist. "Colonel Hayes, you have authorization to deploy the temporal bombs." "Wait," cried Ambassador Quex. "You cannot use such weapons. The radiation will poison this entire system." Kane's cold gaze never left the Swarm representative. "There will be no radiation. These weapons erase their targets from history. Nothing will remain to poison anything." The creature that had been a Keth scientist tilted its head. "Fascinating. You would unmake reality itself rather than submit. Your predecessors showed similar determination. We consume them eventually." "You consumed their bodies," Kane corrected. "Their legacy stands before you." The temporal bombs detonated in perfect synchronization. Reality twisted around the Swarm vessels as they were retroactively deleted from existence. But instead of fear, the ancient entity showed something like admiration. "Magnificent," it whispered through the dying creature. "We had hoped to find worthy successors. When we consume your species, we will become truly unstoppable." The connection severed as the last Swarm ships disappeared from history. But Kane knew the real battle was just beginning. The entity had revealed its true purpose. It was not just consuming species randomly. It was collecting their abilities, building towards some ultimate goal. "Admiral," reported Commander Walsh, "long-range sensors are detecting something massive moving through dark space toward our galaxy." Kane looked at the sensor readings. Whatever was approaching was larger than entire star systems. The Void Swarm had not been the real threat. They had been scouts preparing the way for something unimaginably worse. "Signal all human forces," Kane ordered. "Full mobilization." "Everything we have." General Torres looked confused. "Admiral, against what?" "Our sensors cannot identify the approaching object." Kane studied the readings again. The mass was so large it bent space-time around itself. When it arrived, it would not just consume the galaxy. It would devour the very concept of existence. "Against the thing that scares the Void Swarm," Kane replied grimly. In the depths of space, something that had devoured countless realities was finally approaching its ultimate meal. The galaxy had awakened its ancient guardians, but even Deathworlders might not be enough to stop what was coming. The real war was about to begin. Reality itself groaned as the cosmic devourer entered normal space-time. The entity that had driven the void swarm across galaxies finally revealed its true form. It was not a ship or creature in any conventional sense. It was a living tear in existence, a sentient wound in the fabric of reality that consumed dimensions for sustenance. Admiral Kane stood in the Retribution's observation deck, watching space twist around the approaching horror. Stars simply ceased to exist as the entity passed near them. Planets, moons, entire solar systems were erased not just from the present, but from all of history. The very concept of their existence was being devoured. "Sensor readings are impossible," reported Dr. Reeves from her monitoring station. "The entity exists in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Our instruments cannot measure something that fundamental to reality itself." Kane nodded grimly. She had expected this. The ancient intelligence that controlled the void swarm had revealed its true nature during their last encounter. It was not content to merely consume matter and energy. It fed on the underlying structure of existence itself. "General Torres, status of our assembled forces?" Torres consulted his tactical displays. "Every remaining human ship in the galaxy is here. 200 dreadnoughts, 800 destroyers, 3,000 fighter craft. We have also armed civilian vessels with military-grade weapons." "And the other species?" "Most Council fleets have withdrawn to their core systems. They believe distance will protect them." Torres paused. "They are wrong, are they not?" Kane looked out at the approaching entity. Distance was meaningless to something that could devour space itself. "Yes, they are wrong. When that thing finishes with us, it will consume the entire galaxy one dimension at a time." Elder Noth's weathered face appeared on the communication screen. Behind him, the council chambers were nearly empty. Most delegates had fled to their homeworlds to spend final moments with their families. "Admiral Kane," Noth said quietly, "our scientists have completed their analysis of the entity. It is not from our reality. It exists in the spaces between universes, consuming each one before moving to the next." "How many has it destroyed?" Kane asked. "Unknown. Possibly thousands. When it consumes a universe, all evidence of that reality's existence is erased. We only know of it because the swarm escaped one of its previous meals." Kane absorbed this information. Humanity was facing an enemy that had devoured thousands of entire universes. Every star, every world, every civilization that had ever existed in those realities was gone forever. Not dead, but retroactively unmade. "There is something else," Noth continued. "During our final analysis of human genetic patterns, we discovered the truth about your species' origin. You were not evolved or engineered by another civilization." Kane felt the universe shift around her again. "Then what are we?" "Weapons," Noth replied simply. "Living weapons created by the universe itself as an immune response to entities like this. Your capacity for violence, your ability to exceed all rational limits, it is not a flaw in your evolution. It is your purpose." The revelation hit Kane like a physical blow. Humanity had not become monsters by choice or circumstance. They had been designed by the fundamental forces of reality to fight threats that endangered existence itself. Every brutal war in human history, every capacity for overwhelming destruction had been preparation for this moment. "How many others are there?" Kane asked. "We have detected genetic signatures similar to yours in 17 other species scattered across distant galaxies, but most are still in primitive states. Only humanity has reached the technological level necessary to fight a cosmic devourer." Kane closed the connection and turned to address her command staff. Around her, the finest military minds of humanity waited for orders. These were beings who had been shaped by countless generations of warfare to understand violence at levels that peaceful species could not comprehend. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kane announced, "we are the universe's immune system. Everything we have ever done, every war we have ever fought, every weapon we have ever built has led to this moment." Commander Walsh looked up from his tactical station. "Admiral, our conventional weapons will be useless against that thing. Even our reality bombs barely scratched the void swarm, and they were just servants of the real entity." Kane nodded. "Then we stopped thinking conventionally. Colonel Hayes, what is the status of the Ultima Protocol?" A hush fell over the command deck. The Ultima Protocol was humanity's most closely guarded secret. A final weapon so terrible that its very existence was classified at levels beyond government clearance. Even Kane had only theoretical knowledge of its capabilities. Hayes pulled up encrypted files on his secure workstation. "The weapon is ready, Admiral, but I must warn you. Using it will fundamentally alter the nature of reality in this galaxy. Nothing will ever be the same. Explain, Kane ordered. The Ultima Protocol does not destroy the target, Hayes continued. It transforms the user into something that can destroy the target. But the transformation is permanent and irreversible. Kane understood. The weapon would merge her with cosmic forces beyond human comprehension. She would become something capable of fighting entities that existed across multiple dimensions. But she would no longer be human in any recognizable sense. Sir, there has to be another way, protested Captain Brooks. We cannot ask you to sacrifice your humanity. My humanity was sacrificed the day my species was designed to fight cosmic horrors, Kane replied. This is what we were made for. But before she could activate the Ultima Protocol, alarms began sounding throughout the fleet. The Cosmic Devourer had begun actively feeding. Entire sectors of space simply ceased to exist as the entity consumed the dimensional substrate that supported reality. Sir, it is accelerating, reported Lieutenant Rex. At this rate, it will reach the galaxy's core in 6 hours. Kane made her decision. All ships assume attack formation. We buy time for the Ultima Protocol to activate. The human fleet charged directly at an enemy that defied comprehension. Their weapons fired uselessly into the writhing mass of non-existence that was the Cosmic Devourer. Nuclear warheads, plasma cannons, and gravitational weapons had no effect on something that existed beyond the normal rules of physics. But humanity had never fought by normal rules. Deploy the dimensional mines, Kane ordered. Target the entity's feeding tendrils. Human engineers had developed weapons that attacked the underlying mathematics of reality. The dimensional mines did not explode in any conventional sense. They created paradoxes in local space-time that forced the universe to choose between contradictory states of existence. The Cosmic Devourer recoiled as its feeding process was disrupted. For the first time, something was actively interfering with its consumption of reality. The entity's attention focused on the human fleet with something like curiosity. When it spoke, its voice resonated across all dimensions simultaneously. Every being in the galaxy heard it, not through their ears but directly in their consciousness. Fascinating, the voice said. The universe has developed antibodies. We wondered when this would occur. Kane activated the fleet-wide communications array. This is Admiral Kane to all ships. We are humanity's final battle. Everything our species has ever done has led to this moment. Show this thing why the galaxy feared us enough to lock us away. The human fleet responded with fury that transcended rational thought. Ships overloaded their reactors to achieve impossible energy outputs. Captains rammed their vessels into the entity's dimensional structure. Fighter pilots flew directly into non-existent zones, using their final moments to deploy antimatter charges. Commander Nash achieved the impossible by piloting his ship through folded space-time, appearing inside the entity's core structure. General Pierce coordinated attacks that weaponized fundamental forces of the universe. Reality became a battlefield where the concept of existence itself was under assault. But even humanity's impossible courage was not enough. The Cosmic Devourer adapted to their attacks, learning to counter each weapon system. Worse, it began consuming the human ships themselves, adding their technological capabilities to its own arsenal. Admiral, reported Dr. Reeves urgently. The entity is analyzing our genetics. It is learning to replicate human military capabilities. Kane realized the horrible truth. If the Cosmic Devourer absorbed humanity, it would gain access to their designed capacity for unlimited violence. The universe's immune system would become the ultimate plague, spreading across all realities. Activate the Ultima Protocol, Kane ordered. All ships maintain firing patterns. Keep its attention divided, Hayes hesitated. Admiral, once I initialize the sequence, there is no stopping it. You will be transformed into something that can fight cosmic entities, but you will no longer be human. Kane looked out at the dying fleet. Human ships were disappearing into non-existence as the Cosmic Devourer fed. Soon nothing would remain of her species except the memory of their final battle. I stopped being human the day I accepted command of this fleet, Kane said quietly. Do it. The Ultima Protocol activated with a sensation that Kane felt in dimensions she did not know existed. Her consciousness expanded beyond the confines of normal space-time. She could perceive the entity's true nature across all 17 dimensions of its existence. But the transformation brought terrible understanding. The Cosmic Devourer was not evil in any sense humans could comprehend. It was a natural force like entropy or gravity. It consumed universes because that was its function in the greater cosmic order. You begin to understand? The entity spoke directly into Kane's expanding consciousness. We are not enemies. We are opposite forces that define existence itself. Creation and consumption, birth and death, order and entropy. Kane felt her human memories fading as cosmic awareness filled her mind. She could see the entity's history across countless universes. It had indeed consumed thousands of realities, but it had also participated in their creation. The death of old universes provided the energy for new ones to be born. Then why fight? Kane asked, her voice now resonating across dimensions like the entity's own. Because that is your function, the entity replied. The universe creates guardians to test its destroyers. If we can overcome your resistance, then this reality is ready for dissolution. If not, it continues to exist until it naturally reaches its end. Kane understood. This was not a battle between good and evil. It was a cosmic examination. The universe had created humanity to determine whether this reality was worth preserving. The transformation completed, Kane found herself existing across multiple dimensions simultaneously. She was no longer human, but something that could face the cosmic devourer as an equal. The battle that followed transcended physical combat. It was a conflict between fundamental forces of existence. Reality warped around them as they fought. Stars were born and died in moments. Galaxies collided and reformed. The very concept of time became fluid as past and future met in the eternal present of cosmic conflict. But Kane retained one purely human trait: the absolute refusal to surrender. Even as cosmic forces rewrote her essence, she held on to the core principle that had defined her species. Sometimes the only choice was to fight impossible odds and win anyway. The battle ended not with victory or defeat, but with synthesis. Kane and the cosmic devourer merged into something new, a cosmic guardian that embodied both creation and destruction. The entity's hunger was satisfied not by consuming the universe, but by becoming part of its protection. Ambassador Vex stood in the observation deck of Nexus Prime, watching as the merged entity departed for the dark spaces between galaxies. The immediate threat was over, but the galaxy would never be the same. What has she become? Vex asked Elder Noth. The ancient being considered the question. Something beyond our understanding. She is no longer human, but she carries humanity's essence. She has become the guardian that watches the boundaries between realities. Years passed. The galaxy rebuilt itself under the protection of beings who were no longer quite human. The remaining human fleet had departed for dark space, following their transformed admiral into the void between dimensions. Elder Noth established a memorial to humanity on Nexus Prime. The inscription was simple but profound. They were born in darkness, shaped by horror and tempered by impossible wars. They became monsters so we could remain innocent. When the next threat comes from beyond reality, remember that somewhere in the black between dimensions humanity keeps watch. They are our shield against the dark, and they will never come home. The memorial stood as a reminder of the price of peace. Somewhere in the spaces between universes, Admiral Kane and her fleet patrolled the boundaries of existence. They had become the nightmare that ended nightmares, the darkness that protected the light. The galaxy slept peacefully, knowing that its guardians stood eternal watch against threats that dwelt beyond the edges of comprehension. Humanity had found its true purpose at last, not to live among the stars, but to guard them from the darkness that sought to devour everything that had ever been or ever would be. The distress signal cut through space like a scream in the darkness. Captain Vex pressed his four hands against the control panel of his dying ship, the merchant vessel Bright Hope. His crew was scattered around the bridge, some unconscious, others barely breathing. The life support systems were failing, and they had maybe 6 hours left before the air ran out completely. 3 days ago, the Krillian pirates had attacked them without warning. They stripped the cargo hold clean, destroyed the engines, and left them to drift in the void. The pirates laughed as they departed, telling the crew they would die slowly in the cold darkness of space. Vex was an Altarian, a peaceful species that had never known war. His people were traders and diplomats, not fighters. When the pirates came with their massive ships and terrible weapons, his crew had no choice but to surrender. They hoped the pirates would show mercy, but Krillians were known throughout the galaxy for their cruelty. "Captain," whispered his communications officer Nira, a young female barely out of training. I'm detecting something on the long-range sensors. Multiple ships approaching from the outer system. Vex felt his heart skip a beat. Rescue ships? Nira frowned at her readings. I don't know, sir. The signatures are strange. They're not like any civilian vessels in our database. These ships seem to be designed for war. Through the view screen, Vex could see 12 ships dropping out of hyperspace. They were dark and angular, covered in armor plating and bristling with weapons. Each ship was built like a predator, sleek and deadly. The designs were completely unknown to galactic databases. Unknown vessels, Vex transmitted weakly, using the last of his ship's power. This is Captain Vex of the merchant ship Bright Hope. We sent out a distress call 3 days ago. Are you from the Galactic Rescue Service? The response came in heavily accented Galactic Standard. Captain Vex, this is Commander Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your distress call. We're here to help. Terran? Vex had never heard of that species before. Forgive me, Commander, but I'm not familiar with your people. Are you authorized rescue personnel? There was a pause. Then the alien voice replied, We're not officially authorized by anyone, Captain, but we heard someone was in trouble and we came to help. That's what we do. As the human ships moved closer, their sensors began scanning the area. What they found painted a grim picture across their tactical displays. Debris from dozens of destroyed vessels floated in the darkness. Nearby asteroids had been converted into prison camps where thousands of beings were held as slaves. The entire system was a monument to Krillian brutality. On the bridge of the lead human vessel, Iron Resolve, Commander Morrison studied the sensor readings with growing anger. He was a veteran of many conflicts, a man whose weathered face told stories of battles fought across distant worlds. At 50 years old, he had seen enough suffering to know when action was needed. Sir, reported Lieutenant Torres from the communications station, we're detecting multiple life signs on that merchant vessel. They're in bad shape, but most are still alive. Good. Begin rescue operations immediately. Morrison turned to his tactical officer. What else are you seeing out there, Park? Lieutenant Commander Park's expression was grim. It's worse than we thought, sir. There are slave processing facilities on 3 different asteroids, thousands of beings from dozens of species. The pirates have been using this system as their main operation base for years. Morrison's jaw tightened. The Terran Defense Fleet had come to answer a simple distress call. They were about to walk into something much larger and more dangerous. But that didn't change anything. People needed help, and humans had never been good at walking away from that. Sir, Torres called out urgently, I'm detecting a large fleet approaching from the inner system. 37 ships, including 3 battlecruisers. They're broadcasting Krillian identification codes. Morrison stood from his command chair. How long until they reach us? 15 minutes at their current speed. The commander looked around at his bridge crew. These men and women had volunteered for a dangerous mission, knowing they might not return home. They had families, dreams, futures ahead of them, but they also had something that set humans apart from most galactic species. They couldn't ignore suffering, even when it meant facing impossible odds. All ships, Morrison announced over the fleet channel. This is Morrison. We came here to save lives. Looks like we'll have to fight for the right to do it. Battle stations, everyone. Time to show these pirates what happens when they mess with innocent people. Meanwhile, aboard the dying merchant ship, Sergeant Davis of the Terran Marines was leading a boarding party through the damaged hull. His armored suit allowed him to work in the vacuum of space, cutting through twisted metal to reach the trapped crew members. When he finally broke through to the main compartment, he found the Altarian survivors huddled together in fear. They had heard stories about species from dangerous worlds, but they had never seen one up close. Davis removed his helmet, revealing a scarred human face and kind but determined eyes. Don't worry, he told them in broken galactic standard. We're here to get you out of this mess. Captain Vex stared at the alien warrior. There was something different about these humans. They moved with the confidence of natural predators, but their actions showed genuine care for strangers they had never met. What kind of people are you? Vex asked weakly. Davis smiled as he began helping the injured aliens toward the escape pods. We're the kind who can't sleep at night knowing someone needs help. Now let's get you somewhere safe before those pirates show up. Through the view screen, the approaching Krillian fleet was clearly visible now. 37 warships against 12 human vessels. Any rational species would have retreated immediately. But the humans were not behaving rationally. They were forming up for battle, moving their ships into attack formation as if they actually intended to fight. The lead Krillian ship opened communications, and the reptilian face of War Captain Thek appeared on screens throughout both fleets. His scarred features twisted into what might have been amusement. "Unknown aliens," the Krillian hissed. "You have entered sovereign space of the Krillian Empire. That merchant vessel was our lawful prize. Its crew belongs to us now. Leave immediately or we will destroy you." Morrison's response was calm and steady. "War Captain, this is Commander Morrison. We're conducting a humanitarian rescue operation. These people are under our protection now." Thek's laugh was like grinding metal. "Your protection? You have 12 ships. We have 37. You will surrender immediately, or you will burn with the rest of the debris in this system." "Counteroffer," Morrison replied. "You leave now and maybe we won't send you home in pieces." The silence that followed lasted several seconds. Throughout the galaxy, no one spoke to the Krillians that way. They were one of the most feared military powers in the sector, known for their ruthless efficiency and overwhelming force. "You dare threaten us?" Thek snarled. "You will regret your insolence. All ships, attack formation. We'll teach these primitives to respect Krillian power." But as the two fleets closed for battle, something unprecedented was about to happen. The humans were about to introduce the galaxy to a concept that had been forgotten in centuries of political compromise and calculated diplomacy. The idea that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the odds. The rescue was about to become something far more significant. It was about to become humanity's first lesson to the galaxy about what happened when innocents were threatened in front of Deathworlders. The first exchange of weapons fire lit up the darkness of space like a violent thunderstorm. The Krillian fleet opened with a massive barrage, expecting to overwhelm the smaller human force through sheer firepower. Their plasma cannons and missile systems had destroyed countless enemies over the centuries. But something impossible happened. The human ships absorbed the punishment that should have crippled them. Their shields flared with energy but held firm. More shocking still, their return fire was devastatingly accurate. Within the first minute of combat, 2 Krillian destroyers were drifting wrecks, their hulls torn open by weapons the pirates had never seen before. War Captain Thek stared at his tactical display in disbelief. "What kind of weapons do they possess?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "Unknown, sir," came the nervous reply. "Their energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. The projectiles they're firing appear to be solid matter moving at incredible speeds." On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Lieutenant Commander Park reported with grim satisfaction. "Direct hits on 3 enemy vessels, sir. Their shields can't handle our railgun systems." Morrison nodded. Humanity had learned early that when you lived on a world trying to kill you every day, you developed better ways to kill back. Earth's harsh environment had forced humans to become innovators, always looking for more efficient ways to survive. That innovation extended to warfare. "Target their command ship," Morrison ordered. "Let's end this quickly." The human ships moved with a coordination that amazed the watching Krillians. Instead of the chaotic individual attacks favored by most galactic species, the humans fought as a single unit. Each ship supported the others, creating overlapping fields of fire that made it impossible for the pirates to find safe approaches. Aboard the rescue ship where the Altarian survivors were being treated, Dr. Elena Martinez worked to stabilize Captain Vex's injuries. The alien trader watched through the medical bay's view screen as the battle raged outside. "Your people fight like devils," Vex whispered. "I've never seen ships move like that or weapons fire with such precision." Dr. Martinez paused in her work. "Captain, may I ask what your homeworld is like?" Vex seemed confused by the question. "Altair Prime is a peaceful place. Stable weather, gentle seasons, abundant food sources. We've never known conflict or hardship. It's what most species would call paradise." Martinez nodded slowly. "That explains the difference. Captain, our world is classified as a Class 12 death world, the most dangerous rating possible." The Altarian's eyes widened. Such worlds were considered uninhabitable by galactic standards. "Everything on Earth wants to kill you," Martinez continued. "The weather can change from pleasant to deadly in minutes. We have storms that can destroy cities, predators that hunt in coordinated packs, diseases that can wipe out entire populations. We didn't choose to become warriors, Captain. Our world forced us to learn how to fight, or we would have died out long ago." Outside, the battle was turning into a complete rout. The Krillian ships, designed to intimidate weaker opponents, were no match for vessels built by a species that had spent millions of years learning to survive against impossible odds. Human weapons were more advanced, their tactics more sophisticated, and their determination absolute. War Captain Thek watched in horror as his fleet was systematically destroyed. Half his ships were already gone, and the humans showed no signs of slowing down. These aliens fought with a cold efficiency that terrified him. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender requests from 6 of our ships. They're requesting permission to withdraw." Thek's pride warred with his survival instincts. The Krillian Empire had never retreated from battle, but they had never faced anything like these humans either. "Open a channel to the human commander," he finally ordered. Morrison's image appeared on the Krillian view screen. The human's expression was calm but implacable. "War Captain, I'm prepared to accept your surrender." "Surrender?" Thek's voice cracked with disbelief. "The Krillian Empire does not surrender to anyone." "Then you'll die here," Morrison replied simply. "Your choice." The brutal honesty of the statement shocked Thek. Most galactic species would engage in lengthy negotiations, offering face-saving compromises. The humans seemed genuinely indifferent to Krillian pride or political considerations. "You would destroy us all?" Thek asked. "If that's what it takes to protect the innocents you've been enslaving, yes." Morrison's voice carried absolute conviction. "War Captain, I don't care about your empire or your reputation. I care about the thousands of beings you've captured and tortured. Either you surrender and face justice, or you die, and we free them anyway." In the slave processing facilities on the nearby asteroids, thousands of prisoners from dozens of species watched the battle through stolen communication devices. For years they had prayed for rescue that never came. The Galactic Council issued statements of concern but never took action. Now, finally someone was fighting for them. An elderly Centaurian named Corex, who had been a slave for over a decade, spoke to his fellow prisoners. "I don't know who these humans are, but they're willing to die for us. That's more than our own governments ever did." The battle was effectively over. Of the 37 Krillian ships that had entered the system, only 8 remained functional and they were badly damaged. The human fleet had suffered minor damage to 3 vessels and no casualties. War Captain Thek finally accepted reality. "I surrender," he transmitted. "My remaining ships will stand down." Morrison's response was immediate. "All Krillian vessels will shut down weapons and prepare to be boarded. Your crews will be processed as prisoners of war. Any ship that attempts to flee will be destroyed." As human Marines began boarding the surrendered vessels, Lieutenant Torres reported new contacts on the long-range sensors. "Sir, we're detecting multiple ships approaching from various directions. They appear to be civilian vessels." Morrison frowned. "Identification?" "Mixed, sir. Traders, passenger ships, even some small cargo haulers. They're all broadcasting the same message. They want to help with the rescue operations." Word of the battle was spreading faster than the humans had anticipated. Across the sector, beings who had lived in fear of the Krillians for decades were finally seeing hope. The mysterious humans had done what no galactic power had managed. They had stood up to the pirates and won. Captain Vex, now recovered enough to walk, approached Commander Morrison as the human leader toured the medical facility. "Commander, I must ask, why did your people risk everything for strangers? You could have been killed." Morrison considered the question carefully. "Captain, where we come from, we have a saying. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. We heard your call for help, and we couldn't do nothing. But the odds were against you. Any rational analysis would have suggested retreat." Morrison smiled grimly. "Captain, rationality is a luxury you can't afford when people are dying. Sometimes you have to do what's right even when it's not smart." As the human fleet began organizing rescue operations for the freed slaves, news of their victory was racing across galactic communication networks. The implications were staggering. An unknown species had appeared from nowhere and single-handedly defeated one of the sector's most feared military forces. The galaxy was about to learn that there was a new player in galactic politics, and this player operated by rules that no one had seen before. News of the human victory spread across the galaxy faster than hyperspace itself. Within hours, every major news network was broadcasting the story of the mysterious Terrans, who had appeared from nowhere to destroy a Krillian battle fleet. The reactions were mixed and intense. On Centrix Prime, the gleaming capital world of the Galactic Council, emergency sessions convened around the clock. Councillor Thex of the Andromedan Commonwealth stood before the assembled representatives, his blue scales reflecting the chamber's lights. "Fellow councillors," Thex began, "we face an unprecedented situation. An unknown military force has engaged in combat operations without authorization, resulting in the destruction of 37 vessels and the capture of a major Krillian base." Representative Nala of the Vegan Alliance interrupted. "With respect, Councillor, perhaps we should be thanking these humans rather than condemning them. The Krillians have been a plague on peaceful commerce for decades. The method matters," argued General Zorth of the Hegemony Defense Corps. "Any species capable of such military prowess represents a potential threat to galactic stability. We must approach them with extreme caution." Meanwhile, aboard the Iron Resolve, Commander Morrison was dealing with problems he had never anticipated. The liberation of the slave processing facilities had yielded nearly 4,000 beings from dozens of different species. The human fleet's resources were stretched to breaking point trying to care for them all. Dr. Martinez worked 18-hour shifts in the expanded medical bays, treating injuries and illnesses that human medicine had never encountered before. Her staff improvised constantly, adapting human medical equipment for alien physiologies. "Commander," she reported during the morning briefing, "we've stabilized most of the critical cases, but we're facing long-term challenges. Some of these beings have been enslaved for decades. The psychological trauma will take years to heal." Lieutenant Commander Park added his concerns. "Sir, we're receiving dozens of distress calls from across the sector. Word has spread that someone finally stood up to the Krillians. Every oppressed colony in the region is calling for our help." Morrison studied the tactical display showing the scope of the problem. Red markers indicated over 40 systems where Krillian forces still operated with complete impunity. The scale was overwhelming. "How long until Admiral Brooks arrives with reinforcements?" he asked. 72 hours, sir. But we're also receiving priority transmissions from the Galactic Council. They want to meet with us immediately." As if summoned by those words, Lieutenant Torres announced an incoming transmission from Centrix Prime. The main view screen activated, showing the ornate council chamber filled with representatives from hundreds of worlds. Councillor Thex appeared to be the spokesman. "Commander Morrison, I am Councillor Thex, speaking for the Galactic Council. We require your immediate presence for emergency consultations regarding your recent military actions." Morrison's response was polite but firm. "Counselor, we're currently engaged in humanitarian operations. Once we've ensured the safety of the beings we've rescued, we'll be happy to discuss our actions. Commander, you may not understand the complexity of this situation. Your unauthorized military intervention has destabilized an entire sector. There are established protocols for dealing with situations like this." Morrison's voice hardened slightly. "Protocols? Counselor, where were your protocols when thousands of innocent beings were being enslaved? When merchant vessels were being destroyed for profit?" The silence in the chamber was uncomfortable. Finally, Thex replied, "The situation with the Krillians was complex. There were ongoing diplomatic negotiations. For how long?" Morrison interrupted. "Years, decades. While beings suffered and died in slave camps." He leaned forward, his weathered face showing decades of military experience. "Counselor, where I come from, when someone calls for help, you answer. Politics comes second." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the human command staff in thoughtful silence. Colonel Webb, who had arrived with the first wave of reinforcements, finally spoke. "Sir, they're serious about this. Intelligence indicates several major powers are mobilizing fleets. They see us as a threat to galactic order. In the refugee sections of the human ships, the freed slaves were experiencing something many had thought impossible: hope." Corex, the elderly Centaurian who had become an unofficial spokesman for the survivors, called a meeting in the main assembly hall. "Friends," he addressed the mixed crowd of beings from dozens of worlds, "our rescuers face a difficult choice. They can withdraw to safety, or they can stay and face the combined might of the galactic powers." A young Altarian named Kira, one of the first beings rescued, spoke up. "What would you choose, Corex?" The old being's eyes grew distant with memory. "I have lived long enough to see many species talk about justice and peace. But when the time comes to act, most find excuses. These humans acted because it was right, regardless of the cost to themselves. So what do? We stand with them, however we can. Back in the command center, Morrison was receiving an unexpected visitor. Captain Vex had requested an urgent meeting, accompanied by several other rescued ship captains. "Commander," Vex began, "we've been in contact with merchant captains across the sector. Word of your actions has spread through every commercial network in the galaxy." Morrison frowned. "Is that a problem?" "On the contrary." Vex activated a portable display showing shipping routes across multiple star systems. "Civilian populations on dozens of worlds are organizing supply convoys to support your operations. They're also providing intelligence on Krillian positions and requesting protection for their own worlds." The display showed the truth of his words. Hundreds of civilian vessels were converging on human positions, carrying medical supplies, food, repair materials, and volunteers. More significantly, they represented dozens of species and political entities. Morrison studied the data with growing realization. "This isn't just about the Krillians anymore, is it?" "No, Commander. You've started something that goes far beyond a simple rescue operation. For the first time in centuries, ordinary beings across the galaxy believe someone will actually stand up to oppression. They're not just supporting you, they're joining you." That evening, Morrison convened a meeting with his senior staff. The holographic conference included commanders from ships spread across the sector, their images appearing around the central table. "People," Morrison began, "the situation has changed. The Galactic Council is mobilizing against us. Intelligence suggests over 200 ships representing the major galactic powers will be here within a week. We can withdraw now with our mission accomplished, or we can stay and face a war we might not win." Captain Rodriguez of the Thunderstrike was the first to respond. "Sir, with respect, that's not really a choice. If we leave, what happens to the people we've liberated? What happens to the ones still waiting for liberation?" Similar sentiments came from every ship commander. Not a single human officer was willing to abandon their mission, regardless of the odds they faced. Morrison felt a mixture of pride and concern. This was exactly what he had expected from his people, and exactly what worried him about the coming confrontation. Humans had never learned to calculate acceptable losses when innocent lives were at stake. "Very well, we stay. But understand this changes everything. We're not just fighting pirates anymore. We're challenging the fundamental power structure that has allowed this suffering to continue for centuries." Lieutenant Commander Park leaned forward. "Sir, there is one encouraging development. Intelligence suggests the incoming Council fleet isn't unified. Several member species are having second thoughts about attacking what is clearly a humanitarian mission. Meaning this might not be the massacre they're planning for. The galaxy is watching, sir. How this situation resolves will determine whether we're seen as liberators or conquerors." As the meeting concluded, Morrison stood alone in the command center, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, hundreds of ships were coming to destroy everything his people had built in this sector. But around those same stars, thousands of beings who had never known freedom were finally daring to hope for a better future. The battle for the future of galactic civilization was about to begin. 3 weeks after the first battle, the human presence in the sector had grown from 12 ships to over 60 vessels. Admiral Brooks had established a forward command base on the liberated world of New Haven, a former Krillian slave processing center that was now bustling with refugee aid operations. The transformation was remarkable. Where crude prison barracks had once housed thousands of slaves in misery, prefabricated human structures now provided clean medical facilities, communication centers, and temporary homes. The efficiency with which humans organized humanitarian operations impressed even their critics. Admiral Brooks reviewed the morning reports in her command center. The tactical display showed green zones expanding across the sector as human forces systematically dismantled Krillian operations. But she knew this success was temporary. The real test was yet to come. "Status report," Brooks requested from her assembled staff. Colonel Marcus Webb stepped forward. "Ma'am, we've liberated 23 slave facilities and destroyed 14 pirate bases. Enemy casualties include 58 vessels destroyed or captured. Our losses remain minimal, 3 ships requiring repairs. No fatalities." The numbers spoke to human tactical superiority, but Brooks understood they were facing opponents who had grown soft from decades of easy victories over helpless targets. The forces now approaching would be very different. "Admiral," interrupted Communications Officer Hayes. "Priority transmission from the Galactic Council. They're demanding immediate response." The main screen activated, showing the familiar council chamber. But this time, Counselor Thex was flanked by military leaders from across the galaxy. Their expressions ranged from nervous to openly hostile. "Admiral Brooks," Thex began formally, "the Council has reached a decision. Your military actions have exceeded all bounds of acceptable intervention. You will cease operations immediately and withdraw all forces from this sector." Brooks studied the assembled politicians with the experienced eye of a career military officer. "Counselor, we've rescued over 5,000 enslaved beings and eliminated a significant threat to peaceful commerce. Our operations will continue until the sector is secure." General Korath of the Draconian Empire stepped forward, his reptilian features displaying obvious contempt. "Human, your primitive species lacks the sophistication to understand galactic politics. The balance of power in this region has existed for centuries. Your interference threatens stability across multiple sectors." Brooks' smile was cold as winter. "General, I understand perfectly. You've been comfortable letting the Krillians handle your dirty work while maintaining political distance. That arrangement ends now." The chamber erupted in angry voices until Thex restored order. "Admiral, if your forces do not withdraw immediately, the Council will authorize collective military action. This is not a negotiation." "Is that a threat, Counselor?" "It's a promise." The transmission ended, leaving the human command staff in contemplative silence. Colonel Webb finally spoke. "Ma'am, they're mobilizing everything. Latest intelligence shows over 300 ships from 6 major powers. They'll arrive within 48 hours. Brooks nodded grimly. "Composition? Battleship squadrons from the Draconian Empire, carrier groups from the Hegemony, plus support fleets from 4 minor powers. Combined firepower exceeds anything we've faced by a factor of 10. In the refugee camps scattered across New Haven, word of the approaching confrontation spread quickly. Corex, who had become the unofficial leader of the freed slaves, called for a gathering in the main assembly hall. The crowd that assembled represented dozens of species united by their shared experience of Krillian brutality. Corex stood before them, his aged face showing the wisdom of years spent in captivity. "My friends," he began, "our liberators face an impossible choice. They can withdraw to safety and preserve their forces, or they can stay and face certain destruction defending people they barely know." A voice from the crowd called out, "What do you think they'll choose?" Corex was quiet for a long moment. "I have lived through the rise and fall of governments, the promises of politicians, the negotiations of diplomats. In all that time, I have seen courage like this only once before in my life. The humans will stay. They will fight. And many of them will die. Then what do? We make sure their sacrifice means something. We stand with them in whatever way we can." Meanwhile, Captain Vex was meeting with Admiral Brooks in the command center. The Altarian trader carried data that would change everything. "Admiral," Vex reported, "I've been monitoring commercial channels across the sector. The response to your actions has been unprecedented." He activated a holographic display showing shipping lanes and communication networks spanning dozens of star systems. Civilian populations throughout the region are organizing. Supply convoys, intelligence networks, even volunteer militias. They're not just supporting your mission, they're joining it. Brooks studied the display with growing amazement. The network showed hundreds of civilian ships converging on human positions, carrying everything from medical supplies to volunteer fighters. More significantly, they represented dozens of species and political entities. "Admiral," Vex continued, "you've accomplished something no military force has achieved in galactic history. You've given ordinary beings hope that someone will actually fight oppression. This isn't just a human operation anymore, it's a galactic liberation movement." The implications were staggering. What had begun as a simple rescue mission had evolved into something that threatened the fundamental power structure of galactic civilization. That evening, Brooks convened her final strategic planning session. Holographic images of ship commanders appeared around the conference table, representing the entire human fleet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brooks began, "you all understand our situation. Tomorrow we face the combined might of 6 galactic powers, over 300 ships carrying enough firepower to glass entire planets. We can withdraw now with honor, having accomplished more than anyone thought possible. Commander Morrison, now aboard the newly arrived dreadnought Defiant, responded immediately. Admiral, with respect, withdrawal isn't an option. If we leave, what happens to the beings we've liberated? What happens to the thousands still waiting for rescue? Captain Rodriguez nodded agreement. Ma'am, my crew voted unanimously to stay. Every ship in the fleet reported the same result. Brooks felt the familiar mixture of pride and terror that came with commanding humans in an impossible situation. Her people had never learned to calculate acceptable losses when innocent lives hung in the balance. Very well. We make our stand, but understand we're not just fighting for this sector anymore. We're challenging the entire system that has allowed this suffering to continue. Win or lose, galactic politics will never be the same. Lieutenant Commander Park leaned forward with his intelligence report. Admiral, there is one factor working in our favor. The approaching Council fleet is politically divided. Several member species are questioning the wisdom of attacking a humanitarian mission. There's a real possibility the coalition will fragment under pressure. Meaning we might survive this after all. But only if we can convince the galaxy that we're liberators, not conquerors. As the meeting concluded, Brooks stood alone on the observation deck of her flagship, looking out at the refugee camps below. Thousands of beings who had lived their entire lives in slavery were now free, many for the first time ever. Tomorrow, 300 ships would arrive to destroy everything humanity had built here. But tonight, for the first time in centuries, beings across the galaxy were going to sleep believing that someone cared enough to fight for them. Whatever happened in the coming battle, that belief would outlive them all. The final confrontation was hours away. The combined Galactic Council fleet arrived at the edge of the system like a storm front made of metal and energy. 300 ships representing the most powerful military forces in the galaxy formed into battle formations that stretched across space for thousands of kilometers. Their combined firepower could have reduced entire planets to ash. Admiral Brooks stood on the bridge of her flagship, the dreadnought humanity's pride, watching the massive armada deploy. Her own fleet of 68 ships seemed pitifully small by comparison. But around those ships, something unprecedented was happening. Over 200 civilian vessels had positioned themselves between the human fleet and the approaching Council forces. Merchant ships, passenger transports, cargo haulers, and even small pleasure craft formed a protective barrier. Their crews were volunteers from dozens of species, many of them former slaves liberated by human forces. Admiral, reported Communications Officer Hayes, we're receiving transmissions from the civilian fleet. They're requesting permission to stand with us in battle. Brooks shook her head sadly. Negative. Order all civilian vessels to withdraw to safe distance. This is a military engagement. Ma'am, they're refusing to move. The lead merchant captain says, and I quote, "We will not abandon the people who gave us our freedom." Before Brooks could respond, the main view screen activated. General Korath of the Draconian Empire appeared, his reptilian features twisted with contempt. "Human Admiral," Korath began, "you are outnumbered 5-1. Your position is hopeless. Surrender immediately, and your crews will be treated according to galactic conventions of war." Brooks's response was calm and measured. "General, we're conducting humanitarian operations in this sector. Our mission will continue until all enslaved beings are liberated. Your mission is illegal interference in sovereign space. You have violated dozens of interstellar treaties and destabilized an entire region. This ends now. General, let me ask you something. How many of those treaties specifically protect the right to enslave innocent beings? How many guarantee the right to profit from suffering?" The question clearly caught Korath off guard. "The legal complexities are not your concern. You will surrender or you will be destroyed." Brooks leaned forward, her expression hardening. "General, where I come from, we have a saying, give me liberty or give me death, we're not surrendering." The transmission cut off abruptly. Within minutes, the Council fleet began advancing in perfect formation, their weapons charging for the opening barrage. But something unexpected happened. As the two fleets closed to combat range, several ships in the Council formation suddenly broke away from their assigned positions. Then more ships followed, until entire squadrons were pulling back from the advance. "Admiral," Lieutenant Commander Park reported with amazement, "we're detecting massive defections in the enemy fleet. At least 60 ships have withdrawn from combat formation." "Identification?" "Mixed composition, ma'am. Looks like entire species are refusing to participate. The Centaurian Republic, the Free Worlds Alliance, and 3 others have declared neutrality. On the bridge of his flagship, General Korath watched in fury as his carefully planned battle formation disintegrated. Over a quarter of his forces were refusing to fight, claiming they would not fire on humanitarian vessels. "This is mutiny," he raged at his communications officer. "Order those ships back into formation immediately." "Sir, they're not responding to orders." Several captains have transmitted statements saying they cannot in good conscience attack forces that are liberating slaves. The political coalition that had seemed so solid on Centrix Prime was fracturing under the reality of combat. Many species that had voted for military action were now having second thoughts about actually pulling the trigger. Admiral Brooks seized the moment. "All ships, this is Brooks. We're not here to conquer anyone or threaten galactic peace. We're here because thousands of innocent beings called for help and we answered. Any ship that wants to leave can do so without interference from us." Her words were broadcast on all frequencies, reaching every ship in both fleets. The effect was immediate. More council ships began withdrawing, their captains unwilling to be remembered as the officers who destroyed a rescue fleet. But General Korath still commanded over 200 vessels, and his determination to crush the human forces had only grown stronger. "All remaining ships attack formation. We'll finish this quickly." The first exchange of fire was devastating. The Council fleet's opening barrage was massive enough to vaporize small moons, but the human ships responded with the same tactical innovation that had destroyed the Krillian pirates. Their formation split and reformed, creating multiple attack vectors that confused the enemy targeting systems. More importantly, the human ships were protecting something the Council forces couldn't attack: the civilian fleet. Any weapons fire that missed human vessels would strike the volunteer ships carrying refugees and medical supplies. The political implications made many Council captains hesitate to fire at full power. "Sir," reported the tactical officer aboard Humanity's Pride, "enemy fire is less coordinated than expected. Many of their ships are holding back, probably to avoid civilian casualties." Brooks nodded. "Press the advantage. All ships implement pattern Delta 7. Protect the civilians at all costs." The battle raged for 3 hours, but it was unlike any conflict in galactic history. Both sides were fighting under political constraints that limited their effectiveness. The Council forces couldn't use their full firepower without risking civilian casualties, while the human fleet was vastly outnumbered. But humans had one advantage that proved decisive. They were absolutely committed to their cause. Every human ship fought with the desperate courage of beings defending something more precious than their own lives. As the battle reached its climax, an unexpected voice cut through all communications channels. It was Korax, the elderly Centaurian who had become the spokesman for the liberated slaves. To all ships engaged in battle, his aged voice carried across space. "I am Korax of Centauri 7. I was a slave for 15 years. I watched my children die in Krillian work camps. I had given up all hope of freedom." His words were heard by every crew member in both fleets. These humans risked everything to save people they had never met. They asked for nothing in return except the chance to help. If you destroy them today, you destroy the only force in the galaxy that has actually stood up for the helpless. The effect was immediate and profound. More Council ships broke off from the attack, their crews unwilling to be part of destroying the galaxy's first real liberation movement. General Korath found himself commanding fewer than 50 ships, facing a human fleet that fought with the fury of the righteous. When his own flagship took critical damage from a human railgun, he finally accepted reality. "All ships cease fire," he transmitted bitterly. "Withdraw to safe distance. The battle was over." The human fleet had survived, but more importantly, they had won something greater than a military victory. They had proven to the entire galaxy that someone was finally willing to fight for justice, regardless of the cost. In the aftermath, as rescue ships from dozens of worlds arrived to help with wounded and refugees, Admiral Brooks received a transmission from the Galactic Council. Counselor Thex appeared on her screen, his expression thoughtful rather than hostile. "Admiral Brooks," Thex began, "the Council would like to discuss establishing formal diplomatic relations with the Terran government. It seems we have much to learn from your people about the true meaning of justice." Brooks smiled for the first time in weeks. "Counselor, we'd be happy to talk. But our terms are simple. No more slavery, no more oppression of innocent beings, and no more looking the other way when people need help." "I believe," Thex replied carefully, "that those terms might be more acceptable than you think." The galaxy is changing, Admiral, thanks to your people. As the communication ended, Brooks looked out at the refugee ships filled with beings who would never have to fear slavery again. The price of their freedom had been high, but it was a price humanity had been willing to pay. The Deathworlders had come to rescue a few hundred